Welcome back to the tips and tricks for writing an essay. Now that we've focused our idea and our topic, we can move on to the next step, which is actually writing the essay. So first things first, you'll want to write a thesis statement, and that's very simple to do. Simply think of the subject that you want to write about. Make sure to include your opinion, no matter what kind of essay you're writing, and then you'll be able to put together a thesis statement. So going with my writing about television and Game of Thrones, here's my thesis. I want to write about the Game of Thrones topic, but I really hated the ending. So my thesis could be something as simple as the series finale of Game of Thrones was poorly written, had characters making decisions that didn't make sense, and made the entire story of who would get to sit on the throne a waste of my time. And if you look carefully at the thesis statement, I have 3 main points that I'm going to cover. You can always put 3 points in. You don't have to have 3 points, but the thesis is what your entire essay will revolve around. So make sure it does reflect the things that you want to cover in the rest of the essay. When you are looking at adding evidence to support that thesis, you need to make sure that you're really only putting in evidence that has something to do with the thesis, and give as much detailed evidence as possible. Think in terms of, if I was writing about the Game of Thrones finale and I'm writing to part of my audience who's never seen the show, I'll really have to add in some details. And if I want to talk about why I thought it was written poorly, I'm going to give them actual examples from the script. If I think characters were acting in different ways than they had for the rest of the series, I need to give examples of that. So when you're putting together evidence, you can have examples, reasons, obviously facts, detailed as much as possible, statistics, anecdotes, which are just shorter stories, and quotations from any work that you're referring to. The evidence, the examples, are really an important part and will support that thesis so that the reader will completely understand why you didn't like Game of Thrones. So you don't just say it. You have to prove it and take time to elaborate on your main points. But remember that evidence has to be relevant. It has to be specific. If a reader has questions when they finish, you haven't given them enough evidence. You want to make sure there's accuracy so that no one can actually question your opinion, because opinions based in things that are not fact don't work. And it also needs to be representative. Show the evidence does represent maybe several different viewpoints. Even if someone is reading my essay and has never watched Game of Thrones, they might read my essay and think, I felt that way about a television show that I watched once. So evidence will be something that can support your thesis and also allow your reader to evaluate what's in your essay. You also want to organize, and different ways to do it: chronological, spatial, emphatic, and simple to complex. But emphatic is the one you'll use most often, and that's moving from the least important point to the most important point. And depending on the number of points that you have in an essay, the emphatic order may change a bit, but start with the small stuff and with the big stuff. And throughout this class, we will look at the different rhetorical modes, such as narration through argument. Problem solving is the only kind of essay we won't write in 1101, but you'll get used to using the other organizations. You've probably written those types of essays before, but when you think about it, whether it's a student or whether it's a professional writer, they're all using the same organizations. So that's why we cover them over and over in English. If you read something in the New York Times, I guarantee it's going to have elements of these organizations. You also want to think about the basic organization of an essay. You have to have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. In argument, we'll add a little bit more to that, but for any other type of essay, you need all 3 of these components. And a thesis can really be placed anywhere in an essay. If you don't know where to put it when you start writing, near the end of the first or second paragraph will work, and then you can move it if you need to. But don't get in a habit of making it your very first statement. It might be fine if I'm writing about fishing with my grandfather, but if I have a first sentence that is my thesis, and that thesis is abortion is wrong, well, I've pretty much lost my audience. If they agree with me, they don't have to read the rest of my essay. And if they disagree with me, coming on too strong will mean that they're not going to listen to my viewpoint. So try not to put it at the very beginning, but remember that you can move it around a little later on. For an introduction, there are many different things that you can do. You want to get the reader's attention. And think about the first scene in a movie or a novel and how those writers are going to make you want to continue reading the rest of the piece. You can also look at things like imagine statements, imagine yourself in an English class, cliches, or ever saying, in this essay I will talk about. And those are the things you really want to avoid. But think about using dramatic facts or statistics, maybe refuting a common belief, or looking at a broad statement that narrows itself, or a brief anecdote about something you'll talk about at length later in the essay. There are many lists out on the internet and even in our textbook that will give you some ideas of what to do for introduction, but think about what would make you interested enough to keep reading an essay. Along those lines, there's also, of course, the conclusion, and many different things you can do for that. Summarize, you might predict what happens, using a quote or statistic works, as well as a call for action, but really think about leaving the reader with a final thought. And here's an element that always works in children's books, and you can actually apply it to essay writing. In any children's book, a character starts off at home. And here we have Max from Where the Wild Things Are, and he's really mad, doesn't want to eat his dinner, doesn't want to do what he's supposed to do, so he runs away and finds these wonderful creatures to play with, but after a while, he gets hungry and he gets tired, so he ends up going home. And if you think about that in the context of an essay, you might think about how to connect something that you discuss in the introduction or even in the body of the essay, refer back to it in the conclusion, and really complete that circle for the reader. This is something that tons of children's books will do, because if we start at home and end at home, then we can do anything that we want in between. And think about that structure for your essay when you are writing, especially the narrative or the argument. And finally, don't forget the title. Anytime you have an essay, put a title on it, whether it's a long research essay or just something I have you write in class. And you want to think about what good titles do. They'll usually intrigue the audience a little bit. So something like Back to the Future will work. Something like A Walk to Remember. But don't give away the entire idea of the essay. So just like don't start off with abortion is wrong as your thesis, definitely don't use that as your title. And The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies is actually a movie title, but that one gives a little bit too much away. And never ever use essay 1 or comparison essay as a title. That's not intriguing. It wouldn't make anyone want to read the essay, but think about what you want to name it. And usually good titles are written after you've already written the essay. So that concludes the walkthrough of how to write an essay, just a quick overview. Obviously, if you have any questions, you can always contact me, but take the time to think about these pieces of the puzzle, the pre-writing, the writing, the revision, and use some of these tips and tricks as you go through the semester. Thanks.